Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to the Due Diligence Show. Now, it's been a long time between drinks for the Due Diligence Show. We did our first ever season a couple of years ago, probably three and a half. I don't know how many years ago it was, but we're back and we're here to talk about AI this season. I've got Luke Silcock with me. Hi, Luke.
Hey Adam, great to be here and great to kick off another season of the Due Diligence Show with a hot topic. Obviously, we're trying to engage on perhaps the hottest topic tech has ever seen and make sure we make it relevant for our listeners.
Now, the idea here is that we are having a conversation, right? We're having a conversation about AI, and there's a few reasons for it. Now, first off, let me first say, the Due Diligence Show was great. We had quite a lot of people listening to it, watching it. Quite a lot of our clients, new clients, that type of thing. We're from a company called ThoughtSource. Got to get that out of the way. Our gratuitous plug there for ThoughtSource. And we do a lot of work with different types of companies, whether they're tech investors, tech product companies, folks that are looking to improve on their engineering, on their products. Technical due diligence for M&A is another big thing we do. And there's actually three main characters here at ThoughtSource, the partners. We've got Luke, myself, Adam, Jaques. There's also Andrew. We haven't forgotten about him. He's busy, out there on client sites at the moment. He couldn't be involved with the recording today. But the three of us have been working hard on, of course, helping our clients. But we've been doing a lot of research, particularly Luke, on AI, this massive new topic that everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. We're not quite jumping on the bandwagon here, but there's a lot to learn and it changes daily, right, Luke? I mean, you spent a good part of the last year looking into the different technologies.
Yeah, well, Adam, I'm going to go back 3 years ago, though, okay? And I'm standing beside my son's soccer field talking to one of the other dads, and he's a protein researcher. And his world is radically different from the world of protein researchers from years ago. So the technology called AlphaFold came along and changed the way protein research is done. And instead of humans basically guessing, they created databases, they trained a model called AlphaFold, and it could predict the 3D structures that were going to be found. And it pretty much has delivered on that promise. So today, protein research is not the same as it was. Well, actually, going back 3 years, it's completely different. It is so much faster than it was before. It requires so many fewer people to get the same job done. But of course, what's happened is that whole sector is just going faster and faster. Think of proteins as little machines running around inside the body. They're now moving on to predict all sorts of other great stuff about proteins. All right. So then we'll think of one of a few years back. This was before we added AI and ML to our tech due diligence checklist area. It's now its own area. But before then, it was sort of in this hybrid between the data, the architecture, the design, and the DevOps. And we were sort of encountering more and more data pipelines, models, training. And so we ended up collecting all that up into its own area. But the one that comes to mind was basically in the area of software for tax. And this was for tax officers to make sure they could work out who's cheating. So they were using a machine learning approach to work out what effectively is the signature of a cheat on the tax return. And they got quite good at guessing. So basically think of it as better directing the time and effort of your tax office so that more often when they investigated a case, you were likely to be, unfortunately, unlikely to be doing your best, and you were probably cheating in some way. So they could go straight in with the help of machine learning. And then since then, of course, the major industry shifting wave of ChatGPT has came along, changed it for everything and changed it for everyone.
So let's give the audience here just a bit of an idea of what they're in store for here. So we've got this new Due Diligence Show series we're going to do, and the idea is we take you through completely from end to end. Some people say soup to nuts. AI, right? It's ever changing. Luke is in a unique position where he has spent a lot of time researching, keeping his eye on the ball, experimenting. We have a lot of clients at the moment asking the question about AI from different perspectives, right?
Yep.
So it's, they might be looking at buying a company or a technology, and the question mark comes along of, is this going to be worth anything in a few years? Because is it going to be replaced by AI? Or on the other side, is it using AI in ways that are smart? Or is there potential to use AI to improve business, to improve growth, those types of things? I'm using AI in a very broad sense. A lot of you out there will know AI from, as Luke mentioned a little bit earlier, ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. There are many others as well, and we'll talk a little bit about those. So for the experts out there, this series will be a little frustrating to start with, because we are going to start back at the early introduction to AI 101. I'm not a massive expert like Luke is. I'm going to come in with some of my dumb questions as well. I use it enough to get into trouble, and I understand how it's being used within organizations and how it can be used. But Luke really knows the nuts and bolts of it all, and how it fits together, and what we need to keep our eye on. So with that, Luke, let's start off with AI 101. Where can we possibly start? Usually, let me say first off, most of the audience at least has heard about ChatGPT and the fact that it can fake university assignments for you, and you don't have to write anything anymore, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Look at tax returns, and there is deliberate or fraudulent misrepresentation or cheating. And the kind of the point is that particular one I started with is adding business value to the tax office to make sure that they're leveraging information systems correctly to superpower the people in the tax office. So there's 20,000 people in Australia's ATO, which is the tax office here, and they've got to use that. That's paid for by taxpayers as well. That's got to be used carefully. So then if we go to this other field, and you're right, we're worried a bit about education, because if students have skipped education, jumped straight onto ChatGPT, write out a couple of prompts, copy, paste, job done, has society done the right thing by these kids? But look, it's there. I saw a slogan outside a church. It said, respect your parents. They graduated before Google. And I thought that was funny, but I think in 10 years' time, we might have to have another sign up there, respect those that graduated before ChatGPT or before generative AI. So the generative AI family is dominated by OpenAI and ChatGPT by use and by personal use.
Stop there. Too much jargon to start with for us. Okay,
let's unpack it.
Let's unpack it to. So there are, AI is this thing that you can type instructions to, prompts we call them. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Luke. You're the guy that can correct me here, and it will give you a response, a very smart response, based on some knowledge and some automation that it has within it, self-learning, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now that's very simple. There are main players at the moment when it comes to AI services. So who are they at the moment?
Yeah. So sitting behind ChatGPT is the company OpenAI, with Sam Altman in charge of that one. So they've raised a lot of money, and the expectation perhaps was, and I got a question from an investor recently, because SoftBank have gone round and gathered a whole bunch of extra funding for OpenAI because it's burning its way through its money and not making as much money from customers as it will need to be profitable. So in the meantime, it's burning shareholders' cash. It's raised some more, and the question that came to us from this investor was, is it going to be a winner-take-all market? So is OpenAI, everyone's using ChatGPT, has got such a head start, it's going to end up being the one, And my response, based on what I know in 2025, and we should say this is May 2025, for those that pick this up and think it's an ancient artifact by June or July, is...
That's before we're replaced by AI, right?
Oh, well, I have to say, I've been astounded this month by Google Gemini's podcast creating capability, which
all
did
right.
make me
back on topic.
Let's
Major
keep
players,
it real.
ChatGPT. Yep.
Yeah, and look, it's in my opinion, it's not a winner take all. It will be an important player. It is an important player, OpenAI, and yet what happened earlier this year when DeepSeek came along was astound people. Here's a very interesting model. It got trained, it got unleashed or released, and it got released, interestingly, to the community. So people can download it from Hugging Face, which is one of the websites you could visit if you're interested in models, and you can download one. And one to run in your own computer if you have a GPU.
So you've now complicated things again, right? So let's stay back with the main players. ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
And who are the others?
Well, everyone is a player. If you can create a model or use a model, you're a player. And so
what's a model then?
Yeah, so a model is, in this case, we're talking about LLMs or large language models. And these have been created. We can look at them like a internal part of the system that needs to be running. Now, when the model is created and running behind the web page that you go to for ChatGPT, it's running on their servers. And what you type in can be, used, as you said, a prompt, and you can provide other instructions to these large language models, and then they can produce an output. So that's correct. What you can do is you can run it privately. And when you run it privately, you get the same experience. You can rig up a framework, for example, some open source software called Ollama. And then you can run one of the models that you can go and get and download, and it can run on your machine, and best to have something with an NVIDIA GPU, and basically uses that GPU to run your own small to mid-sized language model. The big boys, OpenAI, Google, they're running ones with billions and billions more parameters, so they give you basically better performance, a better answer when you ask. But the ones I run locally, for a lot of tasks, they give a good enough result. Now, depending on the context, what are you trying to do with the thing? If you're just trying to write a letter, you can do that with a local one. If you're exploring how protein structures are going to exist in 3D, well, you want very specifically to be using AlphaFold there. That's still, as I said when we first started chatting here today, that's the model that community continues to use. When we go,
you mentioned DeepSeek. Who are they?
Yeah, well, that was the Chinese company that came along and got a bit of a fanfare early in 2025 by releasing an open source version of their model. I've downloaded and played with that locally and asked it various questions to see what it was trained on, and has it been trained on different data? Does it recognize, for example, the Tiananmen Square activities that happen in China? And people have been kind of intrigued with how it behaves. It has a thinking behavior where it explains, I should do this next. What was really being asked of me? And so it sort of feels more like you've got an analyst working through a problem than just blurting out the first thing that comes to mind.
So I guess back to my original question about the main players. We're talking OpenAI, Google.
We should talk about Anthropic. Now, Anthropic has it's chewing up a lot of money being provided from Amazon. So I think they've chewed through $8 billion from Amazon, or they've not necessarily chewed through it all because they might have some of it still on hand, right? But they're big, and they've got a lot of models. And basically, it's a longer and longer list of all the different players that have models for different purposes that are available out there. And of course, people will have now seen it creep in. So Microsoft is a big player. They've gone very big on Copilot, which has got people a bit confused because Copilot means so many different things. They also had something of a belly flop last year when they were thinking of bringing out a recall feature which was going to be running on all of their local computers and recording everything. And people got a bit confused, really, and didn't want it. My personal view is Microsoft is still defaulting to pushing it at people instead of having it optional and wanted. So when I open my Outlook email client and I start to write a new email to someone, I'm finding it personally intrusive and I can't actually turn it off. And so they've sort of pushed it in there. But the same is true for Meta. They've got, they've pushed, I would say, AI features into their user interfaces. And my kids, I've got 3 sons, they might comment about how poorly it plays in their social media platforms. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the big players, Adam.
So the Facebook example, the Microsoft example, are they using their own IP or are they sort of licensing that from other people?
Yeah, so Microsoft has gone big in with OpenAI, with being one of their backers.
Which is
the company behind ChatGPT.
Yep. And what
Meta
about Facebook?
Has gone, well, controversially, that opens up a completely different thread, but with their models, Llama models, and the latest version of which was a lot of furor about this is breaking out in the creative sectors. Now, back in 2004, I co-authored a book called Beating IT Risks. And Professor Ernie Jordan, if you're listening, thank you so much for collaborating with that on that project.
I'm looking forward to it. It's got a big chapter on AI. Is that what you're saying?
It doesn't, because it's now... I have to say, Adam, that predates mobile, cloud, big data, and AI now. So
yep.
It's a bit out of date. But what happened was Wiley published it, but then it was hacked as content and put onto a site, a Russian site, where people could download it for free.
Right.
Great. Now, that's not legal. Now, what happened in the recent round is someone with the initials MZ at Meta authorized going and getting that entire corpus and training their models without paying for any of this intellectual property. So Beating IT Risk is one of the documents in that corpus that's been used to train the latest version of the Meta large language model. And they expect to use it for commercial purposes. So what's hot at the moment is, hang on a minute, is this really correct behavior to have harvested the world's information and taught the models how to, how to articulate thoughts? Now, before we go any further, though, we should just dispel a couple of myths here. So it isn't actually thinking.
Right.
And it doesn't actually have a sort of a computer version of a brain.
Okay.
But what happens is, with the vast amount of training that's done, it appears to know things and it appears to compute well enough for many different purposes what should come next. Which is bringing us to this topic of hallucination. So this is when it makes shit up.
Which is why they provide a disclaimer at the end, or on most platforms, saying, please double check our results because you may actually have the disease we've just told you haven't got.
That's right. So, for example, and I've got Gemini Advanced 2.5 Pro brackets experimental open here.
Sure.
And it's saying Gemini can make mistakes, so double check it. But look, realistically, people can make mistakes too.
Yeah.
In this conversation, I have probably already made a mistake, Adam. And as we keep chatting about this topic, it's like, you know what? I think Luke wasn't right. I don't think Bezos has yet tipped in $8 billion into Anthropic. And fair enough, I might be wrong. I came across an article yesterday on LinkedIn that says the world stands to unlock $6 trillion worth of productive capacity with generative AI. And I clicked down into the research papers, and I think, it's clear that there's some amount of creativity has gone into making those numbers up. So we don't necessarily have a great track record as humans sticking to the truth. And ultimately, when we talk about a lot of these things, what is the truth anyway, right? A lot of it is interpretive.
So, hey, I wanted to take the conversation back to, I know I keep getting back to the simple stuff, but
sure.
just so we're all on the same page here. So you've talked about models, right?
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, generally speaking, you have these main players that have, if you like, a processing system, ChatGPT or, OpenAI is obviously a company, but and underneath they have these models, LLMs, large language models that get trained to provide results. Is that pretty much correct so far?
Correct.
Okay, good. So let's take it the next step. What are these models and why are they different? I would have thought that a model is a model sort of thing. Why don't they just get better? What sort of information's in there? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, and so you can think of this about, and I think it's a fairly productive way to think about this, is if you think of an AI model as a bit like teaching a child certain things, there's a certain amount of curriculum that you can give, and there's a certain amount of sort of learning, and fine-tuning is another. We'll try not to go into too much of the content about what is happening. And thank you so much for introducing me as an expert, but what I'd like to actually say is I live in this space between the business application of technology and the technology companies that are creating and shipping it. And in terms of the teams within teams, on the tech provider side in particular, they are deep experts. They are absolute gurus, and they spend their whole life on topics like data science and so forth. And I'd like to reserve a special mention for the people at NVIDIA, who are the engineers that provide and have an amazing roadmap of GPUs coming soon that are just incredibly powerful. And without them, we wouldn't have efficient LLMs running, certainly not on our computer. Adam, it's 100% dependent on these engineers having done just great hardware. And I'm not a great hardware person. I suppose if we're going to cover topics, we need to know where our boundaries are.
So, folks, you can see what I have to go through on a day-to-day basis. It's reeling Luke back into the original question that was asked, which which was about models. Luke, help me out here. Why are they different?
Well, it's based on how they're trained. So,
okay.
If you've got someone who went to university and got a medical degree, then you can trust it when you give it a medical question.
Yeah.
It's a person, in this case, we're talking about. But if you take a model and you train it on the outputs of a medical publications data set and train it in all of this content, it's going to be good at that. And one of the open community models that is good at medical information would be one called Allo, A-L-O-E, and it's been trained accordingly. And so then if you took another one and you wanted to say, I want it to be good at doing maths, for example, well, actually, LLMs aren't very good at maths.
Right.
Because they're language models, so they're predicting really what comes next. And they can translate from one language to another. And they can do lots of really important and interesting things, but they're not great at maths. They're not that good at reasoning, although people are working on the reasoning qualities of these models. So I think as we address AI, I think what we should say is they're not all language models, and some of them use different techniques to, as we mentioned at the outset with AlphaFold, it's predicting in 3D space how proteins will be structured. It's a very different problem that the computer is answering. But in its case, it was trained on a big database of protein structure information. And think of that emerging out of big data. You give something enough data to find the patterns, the computers get enough grunt behind them to work out what the patterns are. Then when they see some new information coming in, they say, aha, we can predict now, and it's outpaced humans by a long stretch here in many fields.
Mm-hmm.
And your question really is about when the data has been used in a training process to then form part of the running model. But it'll have its limitations because based on the date that it was created and then published, then the question really is, how do we get new information into play here? Because it's quite time-consuming and incredibly expensive to train these big models.
Right. And is that the companies themselves doing that training? OpenAI
Yep.
and Meta and Microsoft?
Yes. And, Grok is, having skipped over Grok, it's not one I use, but it was late to the party, but has its own flair because of the way it's been really set up and what guardrails it's been given. So it's basically been given fewer guardrails.
Right.
So it's sort of been trained on similar information from sort of more of the social media context. Mm-hmm. But what it's really been told is be real. And that's kind of, we humans get that, but it's really fun to see this. You can prompt them if you have used a prompt like, give me a story as if it was, George Costanza from Seinfeld, and the LLM would do a good job of turning your script into a sort of Seinfeld script. Or address me like I'm your Henry VIII, and it might give you a hear ye, and so forth. That infinite variety, it's a super creative opportunity to, if I think of it as dancing with the models, right? Knowing what they can do, knowing where they fall short. A friend told me, it was late last year, they said, ask your favorite LLM, give it a word, say, how many R's in strawberry? Mm-hmm. And a lot of LLMs struggled with that answer.
Right.
Another one that's famous is to say, give me a completely empty room with no elephant in it. And provoked with that prompt, the image generation LLMs, or the models, multimodal in this case, will spit out an image that has a small elephant in it. You've said, no, I don't want an elephant, but that's triggered its pathways to end up putting an elephant in. And why can't it count the R's in a strawberry, right? The word strawberry. It's just not good at that.
It is interesting to see when you play around with AI, and, I spend a fair bit of time in ChatGPT and in Gemini as well, seeing some of the stuff that just gets completely wrong. But that's why at the moment I think we live in a world where you use it to cut through a lot of the mundane tasks and the to give you creative ideas, but at the end of the day it needs to be you that is eyeballing and making decisions and tweaking and checking. Now that's not to say it will always be like that. As Luke said, it's May 2025 at the moment. Who knows what June will bring. but actually I've got one more question on models, Luke. So I'm in ChatGPT actually here on another window, and I'm just looking down. So I've got some different modes to put in: 4.0, 03, 04 mini, 04 mini high, and there's some other models there. And it's got like little sub phrases. ChatGPT 4.0, great for most tasks, and then 03 is uses advanced reasoning.
Yeah.
And 04 mini high, great for coding and visual reasoning.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Are they different models that are trained differently, or is the processing different?
Yeah. Now, before we go into the specific model names and so on, I think this is a May 2025 thing, that humans have to worry about prompting still and model selection. Well, actually, what probably is going to happen pretty soon is it'll go up a level, which seems to happen on a lot of these things, so that it will work out what you've asked. It will work out, based on what you've asked, what the right model is for the task. Now, if you're calling the API, which is something that a dev person will want to know, they'll want to know which model. They'll want to know how much the cost per million tokens is. But a lot of end users are like, I don't really want to go to a drop-down box and choose which model. There are other settings as well, like what is the temperature, which it controls how it hallucinates or not, as an example. Now, power users do want to pop that open. But if you said, I just want to ask a question like, which is bigger, France or California? Right? And this is another example of one that's surprisingly difficult for a lot of LLMs to answer. Right. Partly because France and its territory consists of the mainland of France, but a lot of international territories that are considered part of France. Mm-hmm. And it's just not good at the compositional geographic thinking that goes into a land size comparison. And It's been trained to answer similar questions, but mostly it will be considering, contiguous land mass. So let's say it gave you a small model, spat out an answer, and you ran off and used that answer, right? Mm-hmm. Caveat, I got AI to help me with this, so it's wrong. Well, what's the consequence of Luke wandering down the street thinking incorrectly that California is bigger than France? It's not a big stakes problem. I could later be corrected. That's interesting. I didn't consider the foreign territories. But let's say, which leg should we amputate? Take off the left one, right? Well, sorry, take the right one off. Well, you might end up with no legs. So we've got really, that's maybe a bit of a silly example, but what are the stakes? And then how careful should you be? Because you can use LLMs to check your work. Mm-hmm. So what's going to come very soon, hot on the heels of where we are, will be it will choose what's the appropriate model, and we will get multi-AI chains together to give us better solutions. So, they'll work in concert and in teamwork, if you will, and this agentic era is emerging.
Okay, so that's a great segue to the next topic I had. So, what is agentic AI? I've heard the term, and I looked it up a while ago, and it'd be great to hear it again so everyone else knows.
Yeah, so we've been interacting with these bots, which sort of have a personality. Sometimes they're, a chat bot that's very limited in its functionality. It might be on a web page when you go to visit, and you might say, do you have any sneakers in stock?
Yeah, they frustrate the crap out of me, Luke, frankly. Whenever I see one of these bots, I don't go for it. I don't find them useful.
Right. And so as we now think about these different application types that are coming along, and I mentioned briefly APIs, but that's really where the server just sits there and waits for a request to come in and then just shovels the answer back out without worrying about the user interface. It's just giving you the content. And then another app might put a wrapper around that and show it on a mobile phone or show it on a web page.
Okay, so what's agentic AI?
An agentic AI is going to be a running application process that is autonomous.
Okay.
And it's going to go and do stuff using tools. Say it might look up Wikipedia to get some grounded latest information about who the president of the USA is, which will be dated and needs to be looked up again, for example. So it will have that as part of its steps. And then it might iterate through all your top customers. Where are they based, and are they impacted by, for example, tariffs? Now, that might change from month to month, and you might have a agentic AI, let's say, tariff watching feature developed and being used by manufacturers that want to look at that particular topic, right? And instead of humans being tasked like a research assistant, a report writer, a graphics designer, a checker, and then a publisher and possibly an editor or something, these can all be considered roles played by specialized agentic AI that gets its badge or its model card is what they're going to be used as to say, what is this one good at? What are its boundaries? Is it rude? Or has it got guardrails on it? What content can it accept? What context will it take from a nearest other agentic AI that it works with? Is it a supervising agent, or does it delegate? If it's a supervising one that delegates, that's fair enough. Or is it one of the specialized one? I'm just a web surfing agent.
So, hold there again.
Great.
And let's talk about agents.
Yes.
I mean, agents is a term we've used forever in computing, right, for different things. What's an AI agent?
Yeah, I think the key word to bear in mind here, I think, is autonomy. So it's not given descriptive macro, if you will, to follow. Do this every single time, maybe with a bit of if, then else, and a bit of looping and conditionals. It's like, which is a straightforward simplification of a procedural programming method. You might say, I want this automation to be done. Now, before this generative AI era, when people were talking about automating things, they'd typically write all the rules down or load them into some kind of a rules engine, which would then in comes the data, match it, and act more or less deterministic.
Yep.
Whereas the new models are given freedom or autonomy to go and work out what to do and how to get the job done. It's still very much in the experimental phase. They can be quite creative.
So let's talk about the hypothetical you started today's episode with, which was along the lines of tax, fraud, tax evasion, all of that type of thing. So basically, it's an agent, an agentic AI agent example for that scenario may be that it starts heading down different paths of investigation and determining new ways that tax could be avoided or misrepresented by itself. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so in Australia, I'd see this technology being used on both sides of the fence, if you will, because most taxpayers in Australia want to try and do the right thing. But why can't they run a spell checker, if you will, and have this made on their own side? Like, hey, Luke, thanks for contacting the ATO. Here's a web page. That's today's model. Hey, Luke, thanks for contacting the ATO. Would you like to run the tax agent, our agentic AI tax agent, across your affairs before submitting your quarterly returns? Well, you might
self-audit.
Yeah, because that's the style that really makes sense. With quarterly business cycles, most people are trying to do the right thing. And then you're trying to get the vast majority of people to sort of do the right thing. Well, the other side is exactly right, though. If there are currently 20,000 people in the ATO, maybe there needs to be, let's say 15,000 of them plus 30,000 non-stop agentic AI autonomy checkers running through big company, small company, and individual tax returns to make sure that any ones that are anomalous are subject to then a human investigation and possibly fines, penalties, etc.
And so for our US friends, of course, ATO equals IRS. We also have tax here in Australia, and absolutely as applicable in most countries around the world as well. Okay, let's we've talked about agentic AI agents. What about generative? That's a term that gets thrown around a lot too. What's that mean in Luke world?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of typologies or differences that you could go into. It's broadly creating something that may be unexpected. It's not just giving a definitive yes or no answer. We can go back and think about a database, right? And with a SQL query, it'll only ever answer based on what's in the database. Whereas the generative one, trained on all of this, will be happy to just make stuff up. And as long as we've all got, as long as we're getting comfortable with it, it's not unlike humans making things up. But it's not always with self-awareness. It sort of can't blush. So that's where we need to make sure. There's a great paper written about this, and it used the phrase bot shit. So when a human takes incorrect output and misrepresents it, we've heard of this now with a lawyer mentioning a case in court, and the case never existed. There was no case. It was made up, and it was made up on their side with the help of generative AI.
Yeah.
But that's not very helpful. And
well, it's back to the checking the results yourself and still having that human eye. I think over things. Generative AI as well. Of course, you hear that term a lot in the creative field. In pulling some names out of my brain, the Adobe Suite. Some of the Apple products as well. Being able to remove backgrounds, extend the size of photos, remove blotches off skin, all of that type of thing. Generative AI.
And I think we're a bit worried about some things like deep fakes, and we should be aware of that when you look at this amazing image generation capability that OpenAI is now offering, it's deliberately got some guardrails around it. So if you put your own photo in there, it doesn't give that. It gives it a slight tweak, makes it a bit unnerving, not exactly look like you. Again, this is May 2025. We might be just around the corner from having, full 3D deep faking generally available. But at the moment, it's sort of deliberately kept out of reach because probably what humans would or could misuse it for. You could misuse it showing, for example, the President of the United States saying something that the President of the United States didn't say.
Sure. But, ChatGPT have chosen to put some guardrails in themselves based on their own rules of what's right and what's wrong and what should be created and what shouldn't be.
Yeah.
That's not to say that many of the other platforms allow you to do things like that, right?
I think that's a good example. I hopped in there and wanted a Marvel image, and it said no, And again, that's just the way it's been, I suppose, locked down or to just stop the more blatant infringement. But so we're moving back on, though. You can do more in your own private setting to some extent. So if you got a model off one of the community open source repositories like Hugging Face, and you
so what is Hugging Face and what does it provide?
Well, think of it as like a place to put a model that you're happy for other people to download and use. A bit like people are using GitHub for putting software out into the world that they're happy for other people to download and use.
So what then executes that model? What's the ChatGPT that executes that model?
Yeah, so you'll be running it. When you're running it, it downloads a file, and the tool I personally use in our lab is called Ollama, and it's open source software, which I get from GitHub, and it runs and it fetches from repositories like Hugging Face a model. It lists all the different models that it's got on disk, and then when you run one of them, it pulls it up into memory, into the GPU memory. And this is where approximately, let's say you had a 7 billion parameter model, it would then sort of fill the sort of PC GPU model that we have in our lab. A 13 billion parameter model would still run as well.
Yeah.
So it's pretty good. But when you then go online, it's like, oh, I've got a 700 billion parameter model. I don't have a powerful enough GPU to run that locally. And the other one I'm really been interested in is the Allen Institute for AI. And they've been emerging with you mentioned soup to nuts. But what's fascinating about them is they've got the data set. It's called Dolma. That's
sounds like a pasta sauce.
It is a bit like a pasta sauce. It was one of the key ingredients, but they basically, you can see how they trained their model. All of the data you can go and look at. They've published all their recipes. This is very much like you're in your own kitchen, Adam. This is a great analogy for the listeners to think about. If you're doing it yourself, you can basically get all the ingredients, open source, and put them together. But when you do, you'll be limited. Just like you have, perhaps you've got, 4 on your stove, you can put 4 pots on at a time, whereas an industrial kitchen can do just a lot more at the same time.
So with the do-it-yourself,
Yep.
roll your own, open source, whatever you want to call it,
Yep.
you're able to use the models, process them yourself, and does that then switch all those guardrails off? Is that when you've sort of had free reign over what it goes and generates and using your own judgment?
Yeah, well, you can write your own prompts, and you can write your own, guardrails for what you want it to do. The other thing you can do is feed it your own private data using a technique called retrieval augmented generation. So this is where you've got the base model. Let's say it was trained up until December, but last week something important happened in your business. You've got that in a data set or a document, and you put that into your private, alongside your private LLM, the one that you put in, as we were just describing, into your kitchen. You've then also added your own data, but you haven't given this data to anyone else. You've just connected it using retrieval augmented generation. So that locally running version of the model then adds secrets, if you will, or the local data can be considered a secret piece of the secret source, if you like, which then gives it its own unique answer that others would not get, because that data was never provided as training data. It was provided at inference or runtime to kind of ground the model in working out how it should answer. And this is using a technique under the hoods around vector databases. We won't go off into that deep dive now, but it's a pretty fascinating additional part of the puzzle.
We'll save it for another episode. There are many websites out there these days that are allowing you to use AI to create things. So if I look at the stock imagery industry, there are many, you used to go to a website to look up stock imagery, those same things that you see on everyone's corporate websites of people sitting at computers pretending they're interested in graphs and B-roll for videos and those sorts of things that you want someone entering a train on a Tokyo rail station, then you go to these sites and buy a license. All of those sites now have capability to get stuff via AI with different success rates, of course. Many people are still preferring the real stuff at the moment, but I saw a very convincing commercial done the other day, completely generated in AI, I'm sure with some post-production and that type of thing. But generally speaking, what's the back end to those sorts of sites? Like, how are they creating stuff like that?
Yeah, look, this is a fabulous area around vision. First of all, the story for me goes back to, how does the computer know? And have you ever got, I mean, everyone has encountered this when they've been logging onto a site and they had to click on the different things, how many of these tiles contain a traffic light or a bicycle or something like that. I think
we have fire hydrants, bridges, pedestrian walkways, and I'm very good at picking them most of the time.
Exactly.
I am a human.
So that training method was humans basically training the model. And how does then the vision and image generation, vision classification, it's a deep dive topic, but it ends up having effectively a world model of what these different contents that we encounter in the real world, how they're rendered from different angles and different perspectives. And then, look, this is where NVIDIA just keeps lifting up the capabilities, because given effectively these models, given just a very light description of what could happen, it will then create a very realistic rendering of running water, over, Turkish tiles on a sunny day. And it really is so many of these creative areas. It's just mind blowing.
So these sites, would they be using perhaps some open source stuff from Hugging Face with a lot of compute power behind it? I'd struggle to see them having their own IP in these areas, and have created teams to create this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I think it's a specific task, and so OpenAI have the Sora, S-O-R-A, an AI model that can create scenes, realistic or imaginative scenes, and you've gone from text to full motion video, and then you can describe the point of view, and you might say, well, that's it. There'll be no more cameramen and production crews anymore, because AI has come along and replaced all of that. I think it's a very interesting question about where a number of these creative industries end up going. I must just admit a boundary on my specific area of knowledge as to how it does it, and I'm going to put a little sticker note to come back and pick that one up with you on a future chat.
Sounds good. We might have a special episode on that particular topic, I think, because it's just something that's popped into my mind from time to time.
Yep.
It seems very specialized, and there's obviously a lot of processing power that's required in the back end, both if you were to build your own data centers, but also rent space or time on cloud hosted. That sort of flows into, you've talked about NVIDIA, and obviously you'd have to be living under a rock if you didn't realize that NVIDIA have gone leaps and bounds over the last few years with supply of GPUs, and also the demand and undersupply in some cases. There's been points in time where it's been very difficult to get hold of some of the silicon, the chips that are made, where cloud-hosted providers have had back orders of loads of this type of hardware. But back to the likes of NVIDIA and GPUs in general, why all of a sudden GPUs, Luke? I mean, why are we using them to do this work and not, we always learnt back at high school that the CPU was the brain of the computer, right?
Yeah, so it was a feature that was exploited, and why are GPUs good at doing this? I'm going to say that's another great deep dive topic. When you look at the evolution of where NVIDIA is taking this technology and how it was, I would probably describe initially they were in the right place at the right time. So they were using the vision processing capability to render game scenery for computer gamers on using these. And then those same cards were used by the emerging data science engineers, and then it grew from there. And if you think about all these different trends plugging together, that's where I tend to look. If I look over time, I think, wow, Wikipedia, how great is that? That humanity has put together the information that can be used now by LLMs, right? But then I also think how the GPU creation and others are looking at, quantum chips and other technologies going to come along to change the way it's powered. But before we move on, what we should actually talk about is the other key part of this is the power being used, the energy usage. And this is you need the GPUs, but they run hot. Well, they run hot, they need energy to obviously drive them. And
to cool them.
And this is a huge topic really for the planet, to make sure that we have a handle on the usage of this technology, on the amount of sustainability that exists in the energy supply chain for it, carbon footprint, and some other aspects of this challenge. Is there enough? Well, I think we just need to say in May 2025, there's been a rush. There's been like a feature rush in this whole AI space. There hasn't been a focus on efficiency.
Right.
But in my opinion, there will be a focus on efficiency.
I think we probably could reserve an episode for this sort of discussion. We might roll it in with a few other things, but we can talk more about the processing. Obviously, mathematical computation, parallel processing is very important when it comes to this type of analysis. And GPU is sort of an old term now, right? Because it's not about graphics; it's about so much more. And there is an evolution of chips which are specifically made for AI processing as well, from vendors, not only NVIDIA, but others too on the horizon. So maybe we could save that for another time. Look, it's been a great conversation so far, Luke. It's been great to get everything out on the table, keep you on the straight and narrow, try and keep you on topic. Your brain is absolutely full, and we appreciate the unload going on at the moment. I'm certainly learning some new stuff too.
Well, before we wrap, let's just signpost some of the additional things that we're going to cover off on future episodes, because we haven't really talked about cybersecurity very much. We haven't really talked about, I'll give you an example, poisoning. So how do these things get tricked? In training, for example, to have in the model something.
Well, hey, one of my big questions is why aren't we just getting dumber? Like, if we're learning things off existing information and the existing information is being created by AI, where does that go? And we don't have to answer that now, but that's something that's on my mind too.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of when it's almost like a personal choice. I think the other one that leans into is if you're employed doing something and you have access to AI tools and you use them, and you can do more with the same, time that your employer is paying you to work, and you're doing more with less. How does that work? I think we were just edging into that conversation when we were talking about the creative industries, and we're talking about whether you have, 10 people on set, or whether it's just one person wearing some equipment and walking in front of a green screen, and then having basically the entire planet created behind them. In terms of, though, and I'll just return to the excitement, if you will, back to protein science. And this is where I think in some of the business world, we tend to get a bit binary, like this is going to cut jobs, employers will cut jobs. Well, there'll be it'll be a competitive factor. It's here to stay. All tech companies need to have an AI story. It doesn't need to be a definitive final story, last chapter written, because it's an ongoing story being written. But to have, no, we don't have an AI story, that would be a mistake. That would lead to a very significant undervaluation of any tech company, because even if it's for helping to configure the tech, helping to test the tech, helping to document the tech and help customers through their customer success journey, those elements are relevant. It doesn't mean that the core of the product needs to be written on Claude, which...
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about having a sparkly button you can press to auto-generate a bit of text or to, proofread something or whatever. It's about business efficiency behind the scenes as well.
So when we get into that, like what is the blueprinting or road mapping? Which blueprint, where would I like to be? The roadmap, how would I like to get there? And to have a journey. Look, I, as an example, and we talked about Microsoft, and we waited until enterprise data protection was available, and then because we have client confidential information, and a lot of the capability and guesswork on my side in early 2024 was, I think Microsoft's going to come perhaps a little bit later, but with a great product. And I'm about 8 months in using Copilot. I think Microsoft, despite having amazing software engineering resources, I don't think they've quite got the blueprint right. So how does office productivity work in the target state with AI? And in particular, how can you or should you be able to orchestrate Excel? And I'm quite good with Excel, for example, but really I should be even better. So the blueprint I would have for Excel is even better with AI. But at the moment, it's under-delivered on that promise. And then the roadmap about how to get there, I think this is where, in the area of Microsoft Teams, I think Microsoft has done quite an amazing job now. So then when we record, automatically transcribe, and then put through a recorded video link, what just happened in a Microsoft Teams call, that's an amazing advance that we just now take for granted in 2025. So even the giants really need to tune up their strategies and think about the customers first, and also they might need to cannibalize some of the existing revenue. Realistically, will people keep on using all the other, let's say, screen-based products?
Yeah.
If you can just throw the data at the prompt, say what you want done with it, and get, let's say, a pivot table or a chart out the other side, well, Excel might be in the background doing the maths. Now, as I said before, LLMs aren't good at maths. I tell you what, Excel's pretty good at maths.
Yes. Yeah, exactly right. What I'd like to tell the audience as well is there are many people out there who actually haven't started on a journey when it comes to AI, right? That maybe it scares them a bit. Maybe they're busy with the day-to-day, trying to make their numbers for Q whatever they're working in, and trying to get the roadmap assessed and new features added, and customers are asking for new things, and it sort of keeps getting put to one side. Well, the first thing I would say is that sticking your head in the sand is not the answer. AI is coming. Some people say it's here. I think it's probably, my opinion is it's in beta at the moment. You know, it's still, it's certainly showing its power, but it's not completely red hot and ready wherever you are. And a good place to start is just by playing around. And the funny thing was, I was having dinner with many of you out there know Mark Templeton, who used to be the CEO of Citrix and is very active in the community. I was having dinner with him and we were talking about AI, and he was far more into it than I had been. This was a little while ago. And I'm like, I don't even know where to start, what to do. And he goes, Adam, all you need to do is just start playing with it, subscribe to some of the different groups that are out there that give you some experimentation of prompts to try, and just start playing with it. He said, I sit there of an evening, if I'm watching a television show, I'll have my laptop there and I'll sit type a prompt in and just, hit enter and just let it go on the side and then take another look at it. And it's just fascinating to see what comes back and how you can use AI. And the only way of really starting to learn about it is to play with it. And I don't know about you, Luke, but I've found that using it really changes the way that you interact with the computer. It used to be a lot of telling, and now it's a lot of positioning and then asking for things. And
You're right.
And also just bending it out of what you know and pretending that it knows a lot more, and asking it to do things.
I think you're right, and I think playing is definitely something that we should allow ourselves to do when there's something new. I think you'll make mistakes. I think, just to make sure that you don't hire a super expensive GPU-backed resource and leave it running 24/7 in your favorite cloud. No. That can be incredibly expensive. And so just work out what your budget is and play. Make sure that the data you're sharing, you're comfortable using for that purpose, even pictures or images or photos. And there are that learning curve is fascinating. One of the interesting examples, this week is with people might have noticed or might have felt that ChatGPT is sycophantic or sycophantic, which is eager to please, a bit of a obsequious, subservient.
That's one of the things I love about it.
You love that. Well, there's this funny prompt I came across, which is makes it ice cold, and it's fascinating to me how you can take and direct with the prompt. I mean, a plain English language prompt that makes it colder than colder than Professor Snape, for those that are familiar with Harry Potter. And it's just fascinating how, as a community of users, you don't need to be deep in the tech, deep in the science of how it's been put together, or running on the latest of the GPUs. There's plenty of open source to play with. And look, I did mention, but if you want to cook up in your own kitchen, I did mention, I'll just list them off again, the Olmo LLM from AI2, running in Ollama, and I use the DIFY Diffie application framework. With those ingredients, underneath it's running on a Linux operating system. It's using Docker containers. A lot of tech people would think, I can give that a go. And I would encourage you to do it if you're technically inclined. If you're not, hop on to Google has really just got some fabulous products. So try out Google's Gemini. Try out, of course, ChatGPT and the different offerings that OpenAI has on the market. And then if you're interested in cutting code, there's a bunch of different integrated development environments that have or can connect to GitHub Copilot or other vibe coding opportunities for you if you're into software engineering. And obviously creatives are just going to have an awesome time with, as this now edges into full motion video, I just think that's going to be just a fascinating time to be playing.
Well, thanks for that, Luke. And thank you for everyone out there listening. If you've been listening in the car, you're probably doing what I'm doing a lot of the time, and I'm still sitting in the garage waiting for this podcast to finish up because I don't want to wait for my next drive to pick it up where I left off. It's been fascinating content, Luke, and we're looking forward to the next episodes. We've got some planned out. We're covering all sorts of angles of AI. Obviously, we're getting beyond the 101, which was mainly in this particular episode. We're moving into business, how it can be used, how it can be leveraged, some of the things about security, ownership of data, ownership of the output. There are many, many things that we need to talk about. And, probably by the time we get to the end of this season, Luke, I almost think we'll probably be ready for the next one because things will have dramatically changed by then. But
very fair point.
Absolutely. But until then, we'll see you next time on the Due Diligence Show. If you'd like to learn more about ThoughtSource Consulting, make sure you head over to our website, thoughtsourceconsulting.com. I think, Luke, what we may do is create an AI page just, as part of the Due Diligence Show portion of our site, with some of the links of things that you've talked about and places you can go to learn some more.
Nice.
Until then, we'll see you next time.
Cheers.